Okay, we have a new Maamar today. It's from Tafshin Yud Dalet. Shabbos Maya, Shabbos Parshas A, Mevarch Mechodesh Reish Chodesh El. Achre Elkicham Tellechum, you shall follow after Havaya your God, V'oiset Yiro, and him you shall fear, as mitzvahs of Tishmeir, and you shall observe his mitzvahs, guard his mitzvahs, B'koil Tishmo, and you should listen to his voice. Ba'oiset avoda, and him you shall serve. Ba'oiset bakon, and you shall cleave to him. Chashiv Khan, close Seder avoid. Here he enumerates the general order of a person's avoid. Tzarech lahav, we need to understand. Shari only yodim klal. No, a rule. Shaskol, that's why side avoida vayiram, that the beginning and the foundation for avoidam is a level of yir. The da tar li'ilah. The Zohar says this is the gate to above, meaning just like a gate is an entrance to a house, the same thing, Yira is the entrance as the way and the means through which we go up to everything else. So that's why Yira is called the beginning of the Avodah. It's the gate, it's the entrance, it's how we start everything. Being Cain, if so, should have said initially that him you shall fear. And why does he begin after Hashem your God you shall go? Because, like it says in the beginning of the pasuk, there's a whole bunch of things that the pasuk goes through, and it says Achre is the first thing. Just one step over is Tiro, you shall fear him. Seemingly, the Tiro should have been the first thing. Another thing we need to understand, because of what it says, after Hashem your God, you shall go, you shall follow. In other words, not only is he asking about it being out of order, now he wants to understand about the halicha itself. Concerning the going, we also find what it says. You shall go in his ways. What is it talking about in his ways when it says specifically the term his ways? What does it mean, his ways? Shahu derech ha-Torah mitzvah. It's the ways of Torah mitzvah. Shekasu, we see, how do we see that Torah mitzvah is called the ways of Hashem? Shekasu v'shamru derech havaya, that you shall observe and guard the way of Havaya. And the pasuk goes on to say, what does it mean going in the ways of Havaya? Lasit tzedakah mishpat, to do tzedakah and mishpat. Shehu Torah mitzvahs. The term tzedakah mishpat is a general term that includes in it both Torah and mitzvahs. Therefore, since that includes the idea of Torah and mitzvahs, and that is called that Vishamru Derech Havaya. So we see that Derech Havaya is the meaning of Torah mitzvah. So in that's the idea of going in his ways. This is not what it says. You shall go after following Havaya Lekechem. It's something else. It's not. It doesn't say about the Rochav. It doesn't say about the Derech Havaya. So obviously, it's something else. It's a different type of halicha. It's a different type of travel, a different type of going. It's our we need to understand. What's the idea of going after Havaya Lekechem? At the end of all of the things, it says Telechu, Tiro, Tishmeiru, Tishmo, Tavoidu, Uboisid Bok. The final things. He concludes, the final thing he concludes, you shall cleave to him, you shall connect him. And it uses a long nun, a nun shuta, as we call it in Lashon Kodesh. The kulam hu misayim bevav, and all of these things that we enumerated, Telechu, Tiro, etc. It doesn't say Telechun, it doesn't say Tiro'un, he just concludes it with a vav. With the boys in Bakum Daf, specifically the avoid on him. You shall cleave specifically. You should tachlis avoid. It's the goal and the purpose of avoidum. Karichoyshev kan klolos say that avoidum ad bechinas of boited bakun that he enumerates over here the general seder of the avoid till it says in him you shall cleave. So in other words, that's the tachlis, that's the end, that's what you're working your way up to, and that's like the final step after all of these things that he enumerated. By the Zoom assignment, and this avoid concludes with a straight nun, with a final nun. So we need to understand what's the reason for this change. Why by the end of it all? Why by the tachlis avoid do we use the nun shut? Seemingly, all of them should have been with a simple nun, or this one should have also been with a simple nun, meaning a long nun, an end nun, in other words, tiron, tishmon, etc. Or it should have said here, instead of tibakun, it could have said tibaku. Why the inconsistency? Either all should conclude the same way, or all should conclude not either. They should all conclude the same way. Why the French? We'll saying to move on even more. It's not understood. Final question: when it's brought down the Sifri on the pasuk, you shall cleave to him. Seemingly, the Sifri is trying to understand what does cleaving entail more than anything else that we've spoken about before in the pasuk. So the Sifri says an interesting thing. Separate yourselves from idolatry, from avodah zarah, and cleave to the Eibishter. Seemingly, this idea, separating yourself from avodah zarah, that's before doing any avodah. How does the Sifri explain this? What's the meaning of what the Sifri is saying this? That he's saying on the end of the avodah says, in him you shall cleave, that's the goal of the avodah, it's the end of the avodah. Seemingly this shouldn't be at the end of the avodah. Seemingly this is like before you even begin, before you even start, you have to separate yourself from avodah zarah. So, in summary, the questions are: question number one is the first thing he should have said is Yira, because Yira is the beginning of every avodah. Another thing is, what does it mean that Teilechu over here? It's not talking about Torah mitzvahs, because or else it would have used the word Derech Havaya, since it doesn't use the word Derech Hashem or Drachav or so on. It's not talking about Torah mitzvahs when it says Achre Elkicham Teilechu. Another thing is why the differentiation that the last one we end with a long nun, tidbakun, but the rest of them are only with a vav, not with a long nun. And finally, the question is, how could you say boisud bakun is the end, the goal of the avodah, to separate yourself from avodah zarah? Separating yourself from avodah zarah, that's before everything. Second paragraph on the first page of the Maamar, page 164. The idea behind this is the difference between going in his ways to the level of going after going in his ways. It's talking about the hamshacha that comes from above to below. What does that mean? It explains that just like a way. What is the idea behind it is it serves the purpose that through it you travel from one place to other place. That's what a road is for. So too, it's the road of Hashem, trying to limit our Torah mitzvah through the study of Torah and fulfilling mitzvahs. We draw down godliness into the world. So that's the road, that's the path from above to below. We're drawing down from the Eibishter down here into this world. So that's why it's called the traveling and going from above to below. There's another way in avoida. That's the elevation from below to above. That's the line of service. The avoida, as in my avoidus Hashem, my becoming close to the Eibishter. The derech havayis ruam shochem omayla mato kava toidam. The way of Hashem, that's the drawing down from above to below. That's the line of Torah. As we know, there's Torah, Avodah, and Bos Hasadim. So that's coming down from above to below, the level of Torah, and also mitzvahs, like you said before. The elevation and rising up and going from below to above. That's the line of the three lines, Torah, Avodah, and Bos Hasadim. That's the line of Avodah. My Cain, so too, just like it is by the avodah, which in the literal meaning of avodah, it's talking about the avodah of karbonos. So too, when we're talking about avodah by us in our day and age, my Cain, tefillah shekinah karbonos, taking on the davening that was established corresponding to karbonos. The tefillah inyan halah mamatal ma'ila. The idea of davening is the ascent and the elevation from below to above. So so it's not just the carbonas that have the fire that consumes it and the carbon goes up in the fire above, but also davening also reflects this idea of going from below to above. He says there's a nikir gam b'seder atfilah. This idea of going from below to above is also recognized in the order of davening. That the way davening works is like we have another Maamar it's a ladder, and you're every stage in davening, you're going higher and higher. Now he's going to go through different levels of stages in davening. The beginning of davening begins with Maidani and Haidum, the common denominator of the two in Shuaida, Ba'alma, Belishum Asagya. It's just an admitting and accepting of Hashem without any type of comprehension. The Frat Haidah, the Maidani, especially the Haidah, when we say Maidani, you koidem until Shadayim Birchsa Shachar, it's before washing our hands, before saying the brachas in the morning. And so he traverses and travels from below to above. Alicha, we're talking here about Akra V'Alekechem Tlechu. Till we reach the levels of bittul, that's in Kriya Shema, levels of bittul Shemoneh Esrei. That's the purpose and the goal in avodah itself. So that's the halicha. That's why it's called Achre V'Alekechem Tlechu. It's traveling. You're going, but you're going not like Torah mitzvahs that's traveling from above to below, but it's the traveling from below to above. Yes, Yisrin be'inyan ha'alam al inyan hamshach. There's an advantage in the going, in the elevation from below to above, to the traveling from above to below. The b'amshachim al ma'ila. When you're talking about the traveling from above to below, what's being drawn down is only levels of revelation. When you talk about rising up, you're talking about becoming part of and nichlal and niskalel in above. So then that is even higher. That when it says return Yisrael till Havaya Lekech. So one of the explanations, the Alter Rebbe explains over there in Chupitoidam, is Kalus v'Bchinas Havaya Lekech. When you're saying the Yidden are going up, it's Shuvi Yisrael Ad Havaya Lekech, you're going up. It's until you become part of the level of Havaya Lekech. I know Shais Kalus Ilamayla Mayla B'Yoser. Intermingling is very, very high. You reach the highest, most level above, as opposed to what you draw down from above to below. What's able to come down from above to below is only a certain limited type of revelation. But if you're dealing with coming from below to above, what's able to come from below to above is much, much higher and much deeper. That's what it says. After Havai Lekechem, you shall go. Like Shuvi Yisrael ad Havai Lekechem. The same thing, the following and the going and the traveling is to Alekechem. Hine, Zeh shebetchilas hapasuk oimer Achre Havai Lekechem Telech Shu Inyan Allah. The fact that at the beginning of the pasuk, the first thing that we're starting off is to go past and go after Havai Lekechem. That shows that the first step is the ascent, is going from below to above. So that's the first step of the entire pasuk. We were dealing with which should be first. Shouldn't Yira be first? So from the fact that this is the first step, movement is so it's understood from this. Also, all the other levels that he enumerates over here, they call habchinas ubechinas ubeinyan halosh betfilah. It's all levels of ascent in davening. At the beginning of the ascent in davening, it's going after Havai Lekechem. And so it goes from level to level. Until he reaches the level of the ascent of cleaving in him. And now he's going to explain what that is, all those different levels that we have in the halah of davening, and how that eventually leads, and how the ultimate ascent is uboisid bakum. These Maamar are not broken up into smaller paragraphs, so I'll break over here in case anybody has any questions before we go on. Any questions? Okay. So then he goes on to explain the different levels over here that we're talking about in the aliyah of avoid. That the beginning of the avoid is where it says, you shall go after Havai Lekechem. The Achrei hu meloshen Achrei. After, following, that's referring to the back. From the word the back, basar katfoy, like it says, over his shoulders, that there's a level of acharayim where he gives a gift to someone that he doesn't like, he gives them over his shoulders. It's a level of acharayim, it's a level of the external. These are negative things that do not have the inner will of Hashem in it. They're only the back. So that's what it means, that you're dealing still with things that are negative, that are receiving from Hashem's level of acharayim. That's the area where you're at. You're getting rid of those things, as I'm going to explain. Now, there's negative things that come from acharayim. Then there are things that are not negative, but they're not kedusha. The gam divrei reshus are also permitted matters. They're only ancillary things, auxiliary things to the inner part of completing the intention of having a home down here below. So that's what it means. You're dealing with things that are coming from the acharayim, from the chitzonius harotzen. In the bedvarim elu sheim b'chinas acharayim. These things that are considered the external things that Hashem, and this is the beginning of a person's avodah. That's what it means, like the back of Hashem Alekechem. And this affects that you should be able to travel, you should be able to have the avodah. So he gives now a very interesting example from the original term of avodah, the avodah in the Beis Hamikdash. Moshe b'avodah sakarbonis, just like in the avodah of karbonis, he neaskala hoisa v'trumas hadesha. Beginning of the avodah sakarbonis was the cleaning out of the ashes. So this was its own pre-avoida. Before one could do the actual avoida in the Beis Hamikdash and the karbanos in the Beis Hamikdash, there was the clearing out of the ashes. And in the clearing out of the ashes, the Rebbe is going to explain what there were two parts of this avodah. Some of the ashes were swallowed in its place, were absorbed in the ground. And the rest they used to shovel out and bring outside and dispose of it outside of the Beis Hamikdash. And when the person raised and cleaned out and removed the ashes, there had to be certain specific garments for that. But you didn't use the same garments. The Kayanim's priestly garments was not used, the same garments for clearing out the ashes like was used for bringing the karbonos. Like Rashi brings a mashal over there, it's not the same. Even though two servants are serving the king, it's not the same type of garments like when you're actually bringing the food, cooking, cleaning, etc. So you can make cane. So what does that indicate in that? Since there was a part of this that was associated with the outside, that's why there had to be specific and unique garments that were used for that particular event, because it was outside of the world of the Beis Hamikdash. Same thing when we talk about the preparation of us, the Achrayim, putting aside the outside things, putting aside the things that are from the back, the external will of Hashem. The beginning of the avodah is from the time at night, midnight. They used to get up and they used to cry for the Shekhinah, they used to cry for the Avedas and so on. That's the time when a person makes a cheshbon on nefesh, he makes a soul accounting of things that are inappropriate, not good. In Yonim Shabachutz, the matters that are belonging on the outside. In the Amr, as Al Chazal said, a person does not stand up to daven only out of heaviness of head. That this is the way a person should daven, with a certain type of seriousness. And the seriousness that we're talking about, that Chassidus explains, what is this heaviness of head, the seriousness of that Chassidus is talking about? Explains that this is the taking consideration and examination and soul searching of what I'm doing with matters of Acharayim, things that are Basar Katpoy of Hashem, Kaviyachol Hashem's back. On the other hand, there's a different Maamar Chazal. We know davening has to be done out of joy, Ivdus Hashem b'simcha. The kovet, and the Chazal say explicitly that davening has to be done out of simcha. The kovet roish pirush Rashi hachno, and Rashi explains what's it mean kovet roish. That means to sublimate himself to above. So therefore, these two approaches are crucial in davening. But therefore, it's brought on the Ger Tshuva in Tanya. Someone that cannot be and find themselves in both of these feelings at the same time, the level of the sincerity and the level of the level of not just sincerity, but the level of this examination that we said before, this sublimation of considering what he's involved in and how there are things of Acharayim, and at the same time to be besimcha. In the B'shas HaTfilah, Yivasimcha, so Alter Rebbe advises that during davening you should be in a state of joy. And when is he supposed to have the heaviness of head, the inflammation, the seriousness? That has to be by taking chatzois, kashiyasa, cheshbon, masha over Allah, when he makes an accounting of what has gone on with him. That's a preparation for davening. Now the Rebbe says, but it's talking about what I did yesterday. The tikkun chatzos is talking about what happened yesterday. He's making a soul accounting of what he did in the past day. And here we're talking about the preparations for davening today, just like the removal of the ashes of preparation for the avoid in the base of Mikdash. The Kol Makim, that's the perfect example. In Izel Achana L'Tfilah, considering of what went on in the past, and he does it the night before he does it. But that's a preparation for davening, just like the removal of the ashes. Through removing the ashes, raising up the ashes from upon the Mizbeach. So following that, there was the avoid of karbonis on the Mizbeach. Therefore, there is the same thing that the person thinking into what are things of Acharayim, Akhlei, what are things that Hashem doesn't have as Pnimis HaRatznin. Through that, you have the avoid of davening beginning with Telechu, with the idea of the avoid of Malmata Lamayl. Then the Rebbe divides it that in the Trumas Hadesh, like we mentioned before, there are two aspects, two components in the removing of the ashes from Mizbeach. Moshe betrumas hadesh noyabeis kalakim, just like in removing the ashes, there were two parts. Chelik mashanivluim kaimei, part of the ashes were absorbed in its place where it was. Chelik mashaitziluchutz, and part of it was that they had to take out of the base of Migdash. Maikenu bagam ba'avodah tikkun chatzos, so too it's in the avodah of tikkun chatzos, where the person has to consider what he has done and so on, and in his life, in his day before, yes, I mean, and there are those matters. By day, top of the next page, through his avodah, he affects that these things that were only from the chitzonis haratz, and they were the level of achrei and their level of acharayim, he affects that they should be able to become part of kedusha. Though prior to this they weren't able to become part of Kedusha, they were lacking a level of bittul, and therefore they weren't able to become part of Kedusha. He affects in them that they should be able to become elevated into holiness. That is all one type of level. But then there's in the Trumas Hadesh the things that's not absorbed in its place. There's Trumas Hadesh and things that have to be taken out completely at the base of Mikdash. There are some things that a person did that he cannot affect in them an elevation in Ilays Ata. For now at least, he has to completely take them out of his 4 cubits. So that these things that are presently not good, they should not disturb and disrupt his avodah. Like it says, my sins are negdi, always. The Alter Rebbe explains what does negdi mean. So Pirish Begeras Hatshuva. The Geras Hatshuva, he explains, Meneged also means merachik, from afar. So that sin should not bother him and disturb him in his avodah, or at least merachik, it has to be from afar. Until he can affect even in those things, even the Avedas, that through a greater tshuva, ma'avarab, and so on, he'll be able to cause them to be elevated in Kedusha. We'll stop over here. Any questions?